The National People's Congress is taking place in Beijing today. That's the annual sitting of the Chinese Parliament. Yes, annual. Imagine that. And they'll be considering a plan to allow President Xi Jinping to become ruler for life by abolishing the limit on how long someone can be president. It sounds like US President Donald Trump is a fan of the idea. Surprise, surprise. He's reported to have said, "I think it's great." Maybe we'll give that a shot one day. So, if you are a world leader and you just don't fancy giving up the job, here's our handy guide to staying in power.
Never gonna give you up, never gonna let you down, never gonna run around and desert you.
Well, hello there and welcome to the Daily Politics 5-Step Guide to hanging on to power for a really, really long time, even when everybody wants you to go, although they may have stopped telling you that because they're absolutely terrified. First things first, control the media. Accusing them of fake news is one thing, but what you really want is total control of the message. North Korea is famous for its pro-government broadcasts. And don't forget the internet. The Great Firewall of China is thought to be the most extensive system of censorship in the world. There are even restrictions on Winnie the Pooh. That's because it's the nickname of the Chinese president, Xi Jinping. Number 2, change jobs. If you can't rewrite the constitution like they're doing in China, think about swapping jobs.
Vladimir Putin!
Russia's Vladimir Putin has gone from Prime Minister to President, back to Prime Minister and then President again. All you need is a faithful pal to keep your seat warm while you're away, but avoid anyone who's too ambitious. Number 3, get a fancy title. It's always worth making yourself sound important. Idi Amin was Uganda's dictator, or as he preferred to be called, His Excellency, President for Life, Lord of all the beasts of the earth and the fishes of the sea, and conqueror of the British Empire in Africa in general, and Uganda in particular. Snappy. Number 4, if you must have elections, always win. As Stalin said, it's not the people who vote that count, it's the people who count the votes. Saddam Hussein and Kim Jong-un both won elections with a remarkable 100% of the vote. In recent years, Raul Castro in Cuba and Assad in Syria were a little more understated, with between 97 and 99%. And finally, number 5, image is everything.
President Amin leaves his imprint on everything.
How you look, what you wear, how many guns you have, and make sure everybody gets an eyeful.
Elizabeth Glinka reporting, and I'm joined here now by the foreign correspondent Martin Bell. Welcome to the programme. So have there been many dictators you haven't met and interviewed?
Well, I've met a few. I do remember interviewing Idi Amin in Kampala in 1975. I had to kneel. He was on this huge throne.
Did you?
And
what was that? How did you feel?
He gave me some wonderful sound bites, but then the room started filling up, and I realised it had turned into a wedding reception. He was about to marry Lady Sarah of the Mechanized Suicide Regiment of the Ugandan Army. And yes,
and you were part of the wedding party?
Well, I was the warm-up act, you know. No, I've met a few.
What was he like then, Idi Amin?
Buffoon, very dangerous. He had total control of the security apparatus. He was partly put in by the British, actually, because he had been a sergeant in the King's African Rifles. If you suppress your opposition enough, cut down on the free press, run a savage, repressive regime, these people can last almost a lifetime.
Yes, and why do you think they want to last a lifetime? Why do they want to go on and on?
It's the thirst for power, for being a somebody. A lot of them come from humble origins, and you get a sense of entitlement. I don't have to read. Even my 4 years in Parliament, I found I was getting a sense of entitlement.
Right. Now, it's interesting you say that because, of course, if, as has happened with Tony Blair and Margaret Thatcher, you win elections time after time, do you think that in the end power corrupts?
It does tend to corrupt, as the man said. You've seen it time and time again, and I have. I've found very few humble politicians in senior positions. An exception, actually, was Ronald Reagan, who was a genuinely quite a humble, ordinary guy, and no Donald Trump. But mostly, power sort of feeds its own appetites. Yes.
So, what do you think is happening in China with Xi Jinping?
Well, I think, again, we have a dictatorship perpetuating itself under cover of an occasional meeting of the
Very
Congress,
occasional.
But there's a pattern to it, isn't there? And so many. I mean, I remember attending President Somoza of Nicaragua. I was at his 60th birthday party. They were all singing Feliz Natividad, and he was there for life until he ran away to Paraguay and was assassinated 5 years later. Nearly all of them come to a bad end.
Yes, but some of them do last a very long time.
Well, you know, most...
Mugabe.
Yes, but even he got removed under special conditions towards the end. I'd regard him as the exception, yeah.
Right. I mean, what do you think is key to these dictators holding on to power?
I think a total ruthlessness, an ability to project themselves as the saviour or redeemer of their people. One of my first foreign assignments was the overthrow of Kwame Nkrumah in Ghana in 1966. And he was also known as the Osafke, the redeemer, the saviour. And if people believe it, you can hang in for a long time.
Right. I mean, you're in a marginal seat now. You're a bit jealous of some of these people hanging on.
No, she's not.
I've never met any dictators, I'm afraid, though I have met Vladimir Putin.
I thought you were going to say you haven't met a dictator you liked. You have met Vladimir Putin. What was he like?
He was quite quiet. He didn't say a great deal. I met him as part of the G8 conference in County Fermanagh while I was Secretary of State for Northern Ireland. He was very polite and, you know, affable, but quiet.
In terms, though, of people who are democratically elected, I mean, you can think of President Chirac, of course, who changed the law to make sure he wouldn't face any prosecution. It's not beyond the realms of democratically elected politicians to do things that people might think lend themselves to being more dictator-like.
Yes, but in most of our democracies there are checks and balances. Go back to Watergate. Nixon didn't survive. As to what's going on at the moment, I'm not sure, but this is the test of the checks and balances, isn't it?
Do you think things have changed very much? I mean, are we always going to have that sort of churn of dictators in the world?
So human nature doesn't change. There always have been wars, there always will be wars. Politics attracts the same kind of people, and there always have been dictators, there always will be. But there seems to be a bit of a surge in dictatorships at the moment.
Any that stood out to you? You mentioned, obviously, Idi Amin earlier, but any others that stood out to you?
I think Tito. Tito repressed his people, but it was almost a benign repression. And I remember a story which indicates the cast of mind. Two prisoners on one of his prison islands. One asks the other, well, how long are you in for? He says, 10 years. The prisoner says, what do? You must have done something. I did nothing, he said. And the guy says, the most you get for doing nothing is 8 years.
And on that note, Martin Bell, thank you very much. Thank you to you, Teresa, for being our guest of the day. That's it.